Welcome to Clued in Mystery. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brooke, and we both love mystery.
Hi, Brooke.
Hi, Sarah. Today we're going to expand on our series of Golden Age authors.
That's right. We're going to be discussing Ronald Knox, who was one of the founders of the Detection Club. Brooke, how much do you know about Mr. Knox?
Before preparing for this episode, I knew virtually nothing except that he was the creator of the 10 Commandments of mystery fiction. And that is basically where my knowledge ended. And it's been really interesting learning about him.
I agree. Fascinating man with a fascinating life. And I'll just begin with a little bio on him. While his name may not be familiar with many mystery fans, Ronald Arbuthnot Knox's impact on the mystery genre is significant. His fiction bibliography is relatively short by most standards, with only 6 novels and 3 short stories, as well as a few collaborations with other authors. But he is credited with articulating the 10 Commandments of detective fiction and was a pioneer of Sherlockian studies. In honor of his 10 rules, I thought we could discuss 10 facts about him. So the first is that he was born February 17th, 1888, in Kibworth, Leicestershire, where his father held a post in the Anglican Church. He was the youngest of 6 children. Second, his family was incredibly accomplished. His father and grandfather were Anglican bishops. His eldest brother was an author and editor of Punch magazine. Another brother was a code breaker during both of the World Wars. One of his sisters was an author of 25 books, and his niece won the Booker Prize.
I just want to jump in, Sarah. What an amazing family. I don't know what it would be like to be surrounded by all that.
Well, I think he would feel some pressure to be pretty high achieving.
Absolutely.
Number 3, he was very well educated. He studied at Eton and Oxford, where he received several scholarships for his academic achievements. He returned to Oxford as a chaplain, first while he was an Anglican priest, and then again after he converted to Catholicism. 4, the First World War influenced his decision to convert. When it broke out, he was an Anglican priest. Shortly after it finished, and he had lost many of his friends to the war, he was ordained as a Catholic one. Later in his life, he would work with the Pope. 5. Knox was a pioneer in Sherlock Holmes studies with his 1912 article, Studies in the Literature of Sherlock Holmes. The article analyzes several themes in Doyle's work, organizes several Holmes pieces in chronological order, and offers a biography of the detective. Knox had carefully studied his subject, and his admiration was lifelong. His mystery, The Viaduct Murders, includes several references to the detective, and in 1947, Strand magazine published a short story featuring Holmes written by Knox. 6. He enjoyed puzzles and wordplay. He published a book of acrostics in 1924, and his mystery, The Viaduct Murder, features a code. According to Martin Edwards, Knox also worked with his code-breaking brother during the First World War. 7. His crime writing wasn't necessarily religious, but it does feature references that are inspired by religious text. He also wrote extensively on religion, though eventually his bishop asked him to cease crime writing because it wasn't an appropriate activity for a priest.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a story actually that he had. He had a close friendship with a woman, and they must have been traveling together. She did not like his 5th book and threw it over a cruise ship like ledge, and then he didn't write anything more from that. I guess that criticism was just enough.
One bad review.
Yeah, coupled with being told like this is not appropriate for the work that you do
Mhm.
to be writing crime fiction. I do think it's a shame that he was advised to stop writing because according to his biography written by Evelyn Waugh, and he's speaking here about his detective books, Ronald regarded these books, as he did his acrostics, as intellectual exercises, a game between writer and reader in which a problem was precisely stated and elaborately disguised. He was not seeking to write novels. He had no concern with the passions of the murderer, the terror of the victim, or the moral enormity of the crime. He eschewed psychology, violence, the occult, and the macabre. I think that perhaps that official in the Catholic Church maybe just didn't understand what Ronald Knox was trying to do.
Mhm. And, uh, crime fiction authors in general, because I don't think by and large any of them or us are that interested in the murderer or, the crime. It's the puzzle and the challenge to figure out that puzzle. And I think that summed it up so well.
He inspired Orson Welles' work War of the Worlds. In 1926, he performed a solo radio broadcast where he spoke of a revolution occurring in London. The broadcast included very realistic sounding sound effects and caused some panic among listeners because of the political climate at the time. Number 9, he participated in the Detection Club's first round robin mystery. In 1930, Knox, along with 5 other members of the Detection Club, broadcast on BBC a mystery that they penned together. Behind the Screen aired on 6 consecutive Sundays, each section read by its author. And finally, number 10, Ronald Knox died of cancer on August 24th, 1957.
Sarah, that was such a fun way to learn about Ronald Knox, as you said at the top, in honor of his 10 commandments of detection fiction. So, thank you for sharing that. One of the things that jumped out at me is that he is sort of the first Sherlockian, and what a giant realm of Sherlockians we still have to this day. And he sort of kicked that off, didn't he?
Yeah, so his essay it was published I think in 1912, but I think he actually read it at a couple of public gatherings in 1911, and Arthur Conan Doyle expressed surprise, I think, that someone would take the time to analyze his work in that way. Because if you remember, Arthur Conan Doyle didn't really love his
Mm-mm.
Sherlock work. He kind of did it because it paid the bills, but it wasn't his passion. And so, yeah, I think he was a bit surprised that someone took his work so seriously. But Knox did, and as you say, he really kicked off decades worth of study of this amazing character.
Yeah. And uh, one point that I read is in some of these essays he wrote on Sherlock Holmes and Watson, he treated them as if they were actual people. And and I remember that we talked about the fact that there were people in that time period who assumed that Sherlock Holmes was real. And I just wonder how much that work contributed to those ideas that you could go to that address and that's where Sherlock Holmes worked?
Mhm, mhm. We'll include a link to the article in the show notes because it is worth reading. It's quite a detailed analysis of the character.
That's wonderful. I'm fascinated by the radio hoax because it was so realistic. And he reported that there had been the hanging of several people, that there was quote unquote revolution in London, the Houses of Parliament and the clock tower had been destroyed. It's no wonder that he created panic. And then I also read that a subsequent snowstorm meant that the newspapers couldn't get out immediately, which caused people to believe that it was because of the revolution and that they weren't getting the news. But it also prevented them from hearing that this was just a satirical hoax.
Mhm.
But isn't it interesting that a priest would kind of be willing to do this controversial, I mean, it was a lie, right? But I'm sure he had a good reason for this. I'm sure it had a message behind it because that's kind of what these things do. But just super interesting that he was willing to go that far.
Yeah, and as you say, like, I think his intention was that it was satire, right?
Yes.
He wasn't, I think the difference with, War of the Worlds is, I'm not sure that it was intended to be satire. It was meant to be entertainment for sure, but, I think that panic that resulted from that, I think Wells kind of enjoyed that.
Hmm. Hmm.
But I got the impression that Ronald Knox was a pretty playful kind of man, and that, I can just imagine him really enjoying the experience of performing that broadcast, because he did all of the sound effects with, the explosions and, crushing up paper and stomping on things to, simulate um this revolution that he was reporting that had happened. And then I think he just like went off and had dinner and kind of didn't realize what he had created. I'm sure he didn't set out to create the panic uh, that it created.
Right. I think your observation that he was playful is 100% true. And I didn't fully appreciate, because as I said, did not know about Ronald Knox before. I didn't appreciate that a priest was who wrote the Ten Commandments of mystery fiction. And then knowing that he enjoyed this kind of satirical twist on things, I think that we can look at that list and be quite sure that he never meant for it to be taken, you know, as the gospel, so to speak. And there are a lot of people who misunderstand that. This was meant to be facetious and playful and sort of maybe given a wink and a nod to all his fellow mystery authors.
I think you're absolutely correct, Brooke. And he wasn't the first person who tried to create a set of rules or structure around detective fiction. I think there were a couple of other attempts, but the fact that he framed it as the 10 commandments and, probably the fact that he was a priest, and I think he was quite well known for his religious writing as well,
Hmm.
lended it some credibility and um so his work became kind of that rules of detective fiction that we talk about. But I think you're right. I think he uh, what again wasn't intending for people to read those and follow them to the T. I think it was really just like, you know, as you say, nodding to some of his contemporaries, because I think he, spent a fair amount of time with the other members of the detection club. Certainly, they wrote together in multiple instances. They did that. The BBC production that I talked about, uh, so I can imagine that he enjoyed spending time with them, and so it was just a way um, to acknowledge them and acknowledge the work that they were doing.
Hmm. You know, one member of the club that he was especially close to, and it makes great sense, is G.K. Chesterton. They were both theologians. They both wrote a lot of religious, work, essays, articles. And then, of course, they were both mystery authors. And I just find that friendship so fascinating. And I would love to have been a fly on the wall, in their conversations. It seems that they were good friends. And Chesterton actually spoke at Knox's funeral in 1957.
Oh, I didn't know that, but that makes complete sense. So one of the detection club members that he, I think, butted heads with was Dorothy L. Sayers. I saw a couple of references to just some tension between them. Dorothy L. Sayers was one of the detection club members who participated in that BBC production Behind the Screen. And I think they didn't necessarily agree on the direction that was supposed to take. And I think there were some other instances where they just uh, didn't agree, whether it was on the genre or other things. I'm not entirely sure, but uh, there were a couple of references um, to that tension, which had me thinking that it was probably pretty significant if it made its way into his biographies now.
Oh, that's something to think about, right? We imagine that, oh, they were just all a band of friends, but anytime you get a big group together, there's going to be kind of those ruffled feathers one way or another. So it's fun to think about the ones who got along very well, and then there were probably others that didn't. So, Sarah, did you do any reading of Ronald Knox's work in preparation for the show?
I did. So I read a couple of things. I read a couple of his short stories. So the Sherlock Pastiche that was written in 1947. I read that. And then I also read The Viaduct Murder, which I had to chuckle because at the end of the book, there's this final chapter, and there's a little note to the reader saying, if you feel like the book has been long enough, you don't have to read this chapter. And so I think that's just evidence of kind of how playful he was, right? Um, I also read one of his short stories. The works that I didn't read, they all featured an investigator, an insurance investigator. And so he did have a sleuth who featured in most of his writing, but I didn't actually read any of those works. I found it actually pretty hard to get my hands on his stuff.
I did. I read one of the Miles Breeden stories. I was really hooked when I heard that he was an insurance company private detective because those of you who remember that I love Kinsey Milhone, who is Sue Grafton's sleuth, also started her career as an insurance company PI. So I was like, okay, I got to read one of these. Um, I was able to get some of the ebooks on Amazon fairly inexpensive. So if you're somebody who reads on the Kindle, you can probably get some of his stuff there for just inexpensive. It looks like they're on the public domain now. But I read The Footsteps at the Loch, and again, as you said, he talks to the reader. I didn't get to a chapter that said, you can avoid this one, but he does talk to the reader quite often in the story, and sort of comments on the ways of detection fiction, which I thought was very, very cute. I think where the story really shined for me was in the dialogue. Miles Breeden is married to Angela, and their conversations back and forth is that very witty banter, but they also work out the case together aloud. And so I found that that was like a really great way to follow what is a very intricate story, which we see time and time again in golden age fiction. But it was helpful that it was happening in dialogue, and it seemed to stick with me better. I will mention that there's a character in this story called Mr. Quirk, and he's an American who has come over and he wants to help solve the crime because he is a Detective Society of America member. He's been given the assignment to write his own mystery by the club, so he's very interested in learning more about a true crime. And there's also a code in this story, so I think we can learn that Knox really liked to use his code breaking skills in his stories.
Well, that sounds like a really great read, Brooke. So I'll see if I can track that down. I will say in the Viaduct Murder, there, I hope I'm not giving anything away, but there was a secret passage, which I thought was pretty funny given the set of rules that he created.
But only one, I hope.
Yes, I think there was only one. So I did find that book a little bit hard to follow. It's close to 100 years old, and the writing and the dialogue is older, but I did enjoy it.
Yeah, that's great.
Well, Brooke, it was a lot of fun talking about and learning about Ronald Knox this week. I hope listeners enjoyed the conversation. You mentioned some of his work being in the public domain. I think listeners can find his work on Project Gutenberg if they're looking for uh, ebook versions. We will include links to the books that we talked about and the ones that are on the public domain as well, so listeners can go in and read some Ronald Knox on their own.
Yes, it's been so good learning more about another Golden Age author, and I hope you enjoyed it today too, listeners. Thanks for joining us on Clued in Mystery. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Sarah, and we both love mystery. Clued in Mystery is written and produced by Brooke Peterson and Sarah M. Stephen. Music is by Shane Ivers. If you liked what you heard, please consider telling a friend, leaving a review, or subscribing with your favorite podcast listening app. Visit our website at cluedinmystery.com to sign up for our newsletter, The Clued In Chronicle, or to join our paid membership, The Clued In Cartel. We're on social media at Clued In Mystery.